Welcome to Living with Purpose. Today we have a very interesting guest, somebody that I have met very recently, Andrew Wang. He has his own podcast called Inspired Money. Andrew has been doing some very interesting work on how those in the philanthropic space can really think about investing resources in multiple ways. And he also runs a wealth management firm and advises people on it. But the one thing that I found very interesting is that he is an incredibly skilled musician who performs at various events and has studied under some stalwart musicians. Please join me in welcoming Andy to our show.
Thank you, Akhtar. So good to be here.
So starting off, so you are obviously either born in Hawaii or of Hawaiian heritage. I would like you to just start off your journey from childhood and what you have learned and what you are doing and this dual life that you live.
Thank you for doing your research. And to turn things on their head, it's funny because kind of none of the above for me. I did not grow up in Hawaii. I am not native Hawaiian. I grew up on the East Coast. I'm Chinese American. When it comes to the music, I married into it. My wife is fifth or sixth generation Chinese American. She was born and raised on the island of Oahu. And through many visits to Hawaii, I fell in love with the music, and it was a very circuitous route that I ended up playing Hawaiian music. Never expected to play outside of my living room. It's a lesson to have a niche. I think if I were playing blues or folk or rock, probably I wouldn't be playing in front of people all that often. But if you're one of a handful playing Hawaiian music, suddenly I get invited to play somebody's wedding. I get invited to play at a corporate event. And I used to have terrible, terrible stage fright. My hands would shake. My heart would race. I couldn't sing. I could barely speak. So to actually reach a point where I can get in front of 400 people, it's really unbelievable. And over the years, as you said, I've been so fortunate to spend time with some Hawaiian masters of Hawaiian slack key guitar and Hawaiian music and cultural practitioners like hula teachers who instilled in me that I am a cultural practitioner, even though this is not my culture. And it's something that I practice and do very proudly. And it's an honor to be invited into somebody's wedding celebration. It's so personal. For me to share that joy with them is something really special.
This is great. The whole purpose of this podcast is for the guests to talk, share what they want to share. And I'll build up on that. So let's go back to New Jersey, where you grew up. This whole love for music and then love for finance.
Sure. Well, I was born in New York and moved to New Jersey with my parents when I was a year old, grew up in New Jersey, and very much surrounded in this personal finance and money environment because I grew up in a household where financial discussions were the norm. My father was director of research at the Bank of New York, where he ran the research department. He was perhaps the youngest senior vice president in the history of the bank. He was 28 years old, became director of research. The bank had about 200 institutions subscribing to their research. He had a research team of about 40 people doing independent research. So the bank was covering all different industries. And in fact, my mother was a stockbroker. When I was in third, fourth grade, she went back to work and was working at Merrill Lynch. So our dinner conversations were talking about economic cycles and why it's important to look at a company's return on equity. And my father went on to become the president of the bank's money management subsidiary, Beacon Capital, and got a lot of attention because he raised cash for his clients, which included the bank's pension fund as well as outside clients. At that time, the Dow Jones Profit Sharing Plan was a client, some nonprofit organizations, some corporations, and he raised cash ahead of Black Monday in 1987. So was featured in Barron's. He was on the cover of CFO magazine, and I learned from my dad. I got to learn the importance of doing equity research, research on individual companies. He was also a big advocate of index funds. So he told me all about SPDR, the S&P 500 index fund. So yeah, I was surrounded by money talk and never thought that I would actually get into it for my profession. But after graduating from college, working outside of the family business for about 5 years, I came into the fold, and it's been, about 27 years now that I've been in the family business. I work with my brother, and we help people with their retirement planning, with their money management, and it's been great.
So talk a little bit about love for music. When did that come about? Is it something that you just grew up with, constantly playing, or you got introduced to something else?
I'll date myself a little bit. I grew up when MTV had come out, and when I was in high school, music videos was a really big thing. For some reason, whenever I watched those music videos, there was this thought in my head that I wish that I knew how to play the guitar. As a kid, I took piano lessons, never got very good at it. I was taking piano lessons from kindergarten through 5th grade. And it took about 4 years for my piano teacher to realize that I wasn't reading music. I was just cheating and playing by ear. I would just try to imitate what I heard. And it took her a long time to really figure out that I couldn't read music. And, I was illiterate, but I could fake it. For some reason, watching music videos on MTV, I wanted to play the guitar. So after graduating high school, I think I must have mentioned it to my dad, and he told me, well, just do something about it. Don't hope for it or wish for it. If it's something that you're interested in, just go do it. And you're between high school and college, so go take some lessons and see if you like it or not. So that's how it started. I learned how to play some chords, went on to be in a punk rock band in college. And after graduating college, I felt like it's very hard on your neighbors if you plug in an amplifier and play really loudly. So I was playing acoustic guitar. My wife and I were living up in Boston. And because she grew up in Hawaii, we would go back to visit her mom and her family. And I just fell in love with the music and wanted to learn.
That's so interesting, right? That how different parts of our brain kind of make us a whole. That you are at times just focused on numbers and looking at numbers and dealing with numbers and looking at retirements and security for people and clients that you work with. And then on the other side, you're actually practicing something that actually gives people exuberance, get people to move, get people to kind of think in different ways. And it's just fascinating that we all have that innate talents. And most of us actually don't take the time to build up on it. And by allowing what Andy has done, by allowing the two to actually both work simultaneously, he's just pushing his purpose forward in terms of who he is and discovering his why. So talk a little bit about the work that you're doing as part of your podcast, Inspired Money, why that is important, and what are some interesting things that you've learned from it?
I think running a podcast, I'm sure as you have come to see, is the embodiment of having a growth mindset. We're learning something every episode. Every time we hit record, we're learning something. And I love the topic of your podcast being purpose, because I think that purpose is so important. So one of the things that I learned from running the podcast is that before I launched Inspired Money, I witnessed this paradox of wealth and happiness. My wife and I visited Cambodia back in year 2000, and I saw children living in poverty, yet they were genuinely happy. They did not need money to be happy. They just needed enough. Like they were selling postcards and souvenirs at the different sites that we were visiting. And it dawned on me that these kids didn't need much. They were happy. Meanwhile, we know that here in the United States, there are many billionaires who are deeply unhappy, despite having financial success and tremendous resources. So one of the themes of my podcast is we cover a lot of different things. You mentioned philanthropy, and that's what we spoke about when you were a guest panelist. But I boil it down to inspired money is how do you make money? How do you give money? And how do you live a better life? In interviewing hundreds of different people, many of them are striving for financial independence. Many of them are striving to retire early. And I found it fascinating that those who were able to achieve financial independence retire early. They're retiring at age 40, at age 50. They never liked the 9 to 5. So when they were able to live within their means, save and invest, they retired. So many of these individuals find that, okay, it's great for a month, but after that, they're unhappy. They're not sure, what should I be doing with my day? What's my purpose? And the idea of purpose comes up repeatedly because they're not fulfilled. They're not happy. Many of them actually go through depression because their identity was so closely tied to their work, which they never really enjoyed, which is why they really had this goal to retire early. But once you retire early and you have enough money in the bank and you can calculate and see that, okay, I know my yearly expenses, I have enough to survive, I know my lifestyle. Now what? I think that that's one of the things that I've learned, and it comes down to purpose. I think on the financial side, professional side, I see that you look at the statistics, they're not that great. There are so many people that 37% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing or selling something. Maybe 40% of Americans risk running out of money in retirement because they don't have enough saved and invested. So my purpose is to help people with their money. I can do that through the podcast. I can do that through posting on LinkedIn. That's all free. And then I work with my clients at Runnymede Capital Management to help them to do the planning, to do the investments, and to keep them on track. But getting back to the music, I think it doesn't just apply to one thing. You know, you have your purpose in your professional life. You have your purpose in your hobbies. And maybe I can give you a prospective guest. Dr. Jordan Grummett has been a guest on my podcast many times. And he's a doctor who retired early and found himself depressed because he didn't know what is his why in life. He wrote a book called The Purpose Code, which is very aligned with your show. In his book, he talks about a big P and a little p, meaning big purpose or little purpose. Too often, when we think of purpose, we think of big purpose. It's the belief that we need to have a grand, world-changing mission to feel fulfilled. That's often overwhelming. It stops people in their tracks. They say, oh, well, I don't really know what my purpose is. Trying to think of something too big. Little p is finding meaning in your everyday actions that bring joy. So it's process-driven rather than outcome-driven. And I think when I look at my life, that's like the music. It's like, all right, I just want to learn one song today and try not to sound bad. And then if I have the opportunity to play in front of people and share that with people, that becomes purposeful. It becomes fulfilling and satisfying.
I just love how you just framed this with a big P and a small p. In my workshops and our retreats, when we work with clients, whether it is corporate clients, individual clients, we try and get people to understand that purpose just doesn't come from your work. And one really should be focusing on purpose with this grand vision of world-changing stuff. It is really a deep-seated understanding of who you are. And we get people to craft their purpose statement, a personal purpose statement, by getting them to articulate their strengths and their values, and then use that to craft their purpose, and then show them how to use it in everything they do for themselves, their family, their community, their faith, and some of it comes through work. And for the self is what you just articulated. Music is yourself. And then, yes, it becomes participatory. People like it. People invite you, but you do it because it gives you a sense of purpose. It allows you to feel for yourself. and it allows you to show up the way you want to show up and what you want to play versus something else. This is great. I love this, the way you articulated it with the small P and a big P, because people get stuck in that big P and then they get frightened that I can't do this. So how have you used purpose when times get tough?
We all go through challenges in our life. Success is not a straight line, right? We always hear that. And inevitably, you're going to have good times in your life, difficult times in your life. I think it helps if you feel that you're doing something that's bigger than yourself. It helps when you're going through challenges and you can take a step back and say, well, why am I doing this? What is the purpose of doing this? And I think just having a view of that bigger goal gives us a lot of perspective so that we don't stop from little challenges, especially when they come consecutively one after another. You need to have that bigger goal in mind, that bigger purpose in mind, to know, like, where am I trying to get to? What is my destination? And as long as you can identify that and know what that is, I think it can help to keep you oriented as you navigate to that destination and realize that, okay, I may get lost along the way. I'm going to make a wrong turn. There are going to be times when I feel like I don't even know that I'm heading in the right direction. But eventually, you can course correct and get there. So I think it's important to have that purpose in mind and also realize that that purpose can evolve and change over time. So it's not fixed.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, there is no way your purpose is going to be fixed. I actually get my students, undergrad students, to craft a purpose statement. People come back to me 3 years later and say, hey, look, this is how I use it. This is how it has evolved. So purpose is not a static thing. It will continuously change. It's not going to change every 5 minutes, because then it's not a purpose. Then it will evolve as you evolve. It evolves as you grow. It evolves as you go through different phases in your life. And I think the way you articulated it is just absolutely correct. There's one more thing that you said that I actually want to emphasize for our listeners. You talked about joy. I find the word joy to be very interesting. I actually feel that we need to get more and more people to focus on getting joy rather than being happy. Because I feel that happiness is a singular pursuit. I can be happy, my wife sitting in the other room can be sad. But joy only comes with somebody else. You can't be joyful on your own. When you talked about the kids in Cambodia having a sense of joy, it is because they are experiencing joy with other kids. So how we think about purpose, getting us on that journey of becoming joyful. Now, that doesn't mean that all the time you're going to have joy, but it allows you to get that sensationary break that you don't have to seek for happiness, but you can actually be part of a collective pursuit of joy. But I'm also quite sure that you're getting people to experience joy in your professional work as you're providing them with guidance.
Yeah, I think music is one thing, or hobbies is one thing. And maybe it's a little bit easier for people to experience joy, envision joy through their hobby, because it's something that they just love doing, not necessarily getting paid for. I think on the professional side, when looking at joy through a lens of money, I think that gets interesting too. Everybody hopes to be able to retire someday. And there's a transition going from accumulation phase, when you're getting a paycheck, you have your benefits, to stopping work. And then it's decumulation. You hope that you've saved enough money. The expectation for most is that you're not having the income anymore, and you need to do some planning. You need to be able to sustain yourself. You need to cover your expenses. You need to buy food. If you want to travel, you want to travel. I think that this idea of purpose and joy becomes very clear to people who are going through that transition of retirement. There are so many people who retire from their job and they feel so excited, but then they're not sure what to do next. So the question is, where do you find joy? What makes you joyful? Inevitably, since you talked about it involves others so frequently, People say, well, I never thought about it, but volunteering for an organization, giving back, going to my church. It's very community driven. Working with others around me tends to bring us joy. And it's interesting because it's not always about money. I think that so many of us, we have this belief, oftentimes formed during childhood. We all feel like, well, if I had money, it would solve all my problems. And the reality is, most of the time, that's not true. Money gives us options, gives us more choices. It can be a tool that makes things easier, but you still need to find your joy. And it can be just little bits of joy. Sometimes, my dad would take me to this place, Arthur's in New Jersey. Great steak place, but they had a hamburger that was always perfect. You ordered this hamburger. The hamburger was the cheapest thing on the menu. The steaks always cost more. But you get a hamburger and a root beer, inexpensive, but so much joy.
There you go. I think so. Next, this is great. I love the fact that joy does not need to mean that it has to come with lots of effort and spend attached to it. So as we conclude the podcast, talk a little bit. What is your one golden nugget? Your word of wisdom that you want to leave the listeners with?
My golden nugget, I love the saying, do one thing every day that scares you. It's often attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, but when I did a little bit of research, I don't know if that's true. I read that there's an exact match for this quotation. It appeared in a June 1997 essay by Mary Schmick, a columnist for the Chicago Tribune. But I love this idea, do one thing every day that scares you, because too often we just do what's comfortable. And to grow, it does require us to step out of our comfort zone. It encourages growth, resilience, that embracing discomfort, whether it applies to your finances, your career, your personal purpose. I mentioned that I used to have terrible stage fright. I could not perform in front of people. But by doing it repeatedly, even though it was so uncomfortable, physically gave me a stomach ache, but I did it. And the growth and the reward that came back to me, I think that that's my nugget. Face your financial fears, afraid to get on stage and talk in front of people, go do it. Go try it. Because one of my guitar teachers, when I told him that I was so scared I couldn't play, he said, you're not going to die. Odds are you're going to be okay. So just go do it. Just go and get up there. It will get better.
It is such a great way to this notion of just go do it. This Nike's slogan. But this notion of doing something that gets you out of your comfort zone, I think if you have articulated your purpose and you have grounded in your why, allows you to take that step. That doesn't mean you will not be fearful, you may not be scared, but it actually allows you to take that step. And that, to me, is that beginning of that journey. And thank you so very much for being part of this. Again, for our listeners, go listen to his podcast at Inspired Money. It is really fascinating. And you also have your music website, right?
AndyWangMusic.com. Wang is W-A-N-G, but go to AndyWangMusic.com. You find some videos, find some photos, and see what I'm doing on the weekends to stay out of trouble.
Fantastic. Stay out of trouble. Thank you all very much for being on this session of Living with Purpose. See you next time. Do something that scares you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.